By calling for President Trump's impeachment for firing James Comey as FBI director, U.S. Representative Justin Amash is condoning the Fisa spying abuse that led to the firing of Comey. Hello, this is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government. And today we're going to be talking about Congressman Justin Amash, a Republican out of Michigan. He is calling for President Donald Trump to be impeached. He did so on May 18th in a Twitter thread. Then he accuses the president of obstruction of justice. He says that there are multiple examples of this in the Mueller report, and that this is a justification for removing President Trump from office before he is standing for re-election in 2020. He also says that he violated the public trust. Although if you look at the allegations and his on the thread, he doesn't make specific allegations of which examples from the Mueller report he is talking about for obstruction of justice. There were many things that the Mueller report looks at, but one of the things he had identified in May of 2017, after James Comey was fired, if the allegations in the Comey memo, this is information that James Comey put out after he was fired, are true, are they grounds for impeachment? And Justin Amash said yes. So for the purposes of discussion here, we're going to talk about firing James Comey. Now, this is something that presidents already have the constitutional power to do. They can remove the FBI director or other officials of the executive branch who serve at the pleasure of the president. FBI director is one of those. He's nominated by a president, and then he's confirmed by the Senate. So clearly, if the president is dissatisfied with the FBI director, he can be removed. And so that's a constitutional power arising under Article 2. And there's no special civil service protections for the FBI director. And so I think that if it comes down to simply a question of the constitutional authority of President Trump to remove James Comey, then clearly he does have that authority. Now, nowhere in the Amash Twitter thread does he talk about the Fisa warrants or the spying that occurred against the Trump campaign, the FBI investigation into President Trump. It just doesn't come up, but it's important because it gives you context for why James Comey was fired by President Trump. If you go to the actual memo on May 9th, 2017, he says, "While I greatly appreciate you informing me on 3 separate occasions that I am not under investigation, I nevertheless concur with the judgment of the Department of Justice that you are not able to effectively lead the Bureau." So President Trump clearly thought that James Comey was lying to him about the extent of the Russia investigation into the Trump campaign, then the transition, and it was carried over into his administration. If you're the president of the United States and your own FBI director is lying to you, I guess that's grounds for removal. I agree with that. I think James Comey should have been fired. He is lying to the president about the president being under an active investigation. The president's trying to carry on foreign policy and to protect our country, and he needs to be fully apprised what his national security apparatus is up to, and he wasn't. Because Comey was lying to him, and now we know why, which was that he was there was this big investigation into Trump-Russia collusion. But you had a situation where in the Mueller report, there was no collusion, coordination, or conspiracy by President Trump, his campaign, or any American with Russia. Specifically, it said the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities of President Trump. It stated the evidence does not establish that the president was involved in an underlying crime related to Russian election interference. So the Mueller report on the question of conspiracy with Russia cleared President Trump. And so why was the FBI carrying on this investigation in the first place? Why was it so important to have this Fisa warrant be kept from the public's eyes? This Fisa warrant It was into the Trump campaign in October, and it was based upon the Steele dossier. The Steele dossier alleged that there was a well-developed conspiracy of cooperation between President Trump and Russian leadership. It also said that the hack of the DNC emails and putting them on WikiLeaks was done with the, quote, full knowledge and support of Trump and senior members of his campaign team. And that included Paul Manafort, advisor Carter Page, and others. And so there was this allegation. It was included in the Fisa warrant, but it probably should not have gone down that way. I think you had a situation where in October of 2016 they were getting this warrant, but it wasn't really based upon probable cause. The House Intelligence Committee in 2018 released a memorandum that detailed that the FISA warrant was indeed based upon the Steele allegations. And then when that happened, Justin Amash said the central allegation of the memo is that the warrant was obtained fraudulently and without sufficient cause. If true, it shows the dangers of the secret foreign intelligence surveillance court, something Liberty Caucus and Freedom Caucus members have been saying for a long time. And so here, Amash in 2018 was trying to push for the approval of the USA Rights Act, which was going to rein in Section 702 intelligence. And so that's true. We agreed with that. We thought that the USA Rights Act was a good idea. We supported that in 2018 when it was coming up. And in 2013, when Congressman Amash had an amendment to rein in NSA mass surveillance that was exposed by whistleblower Edward Snowden, Americans for Limited Government joined with groups on the right and the left in a bipartisan endeavor to rein in the mass surveillance system that was ongoing, I suppose is still ongoing since the amendment failed. But it was a very close vote, and we've been very, very supportive of Congressman Amash's efforts to rein in FISA abuses. And in 2018, when he was talking about the FISA warrant that was utilized, he's absolutely right. Any warrant obtained fraudulently without sufficient cause is dangerous. The FISA surveillance, therefore, on President Trump was dangerous. Although I don't think Amash agrees with that anymore, even though now we know months after the memo came out from the House Intelligence Committee, Judicial Watch in July of 2018 obtained the FISA warrant against Carter Page and the Trump campaign that detailed what the FBI and the Justice Department were asking for. This was signed by James Comey. This was signed by then Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates. And the FISA court knew that Steele, Christopher Steele, the man who made the former British spy who made the allegations that Trump was a Russian agent, they knew that he was not an eyewitness to those allegations. Instead, he had tasked his subsources to collect the requisite information, and then after he received the information, he passed it on to the FBI. Now, you need probable cause under the statute to get a FISA warrant against a U.S. citizen under this section of the U.S. Code here. U.S. Code 50 U.S. Code 1805. You can't see 50. It's off to the side here, but it's 50 U.S. Code 1805, and it calls for probable cause that whoever you're targeting is a foreign agent. And so they were saying Carter Page was a foreign agent. This would have given the Justice Department access to Page's emails and texts and phone calls and other documents, and then his contacts, emails, phones, texts and documents, the contacts of contacts, and so forth. So you get a big web of surveillance, and it was on the Trump campaign, and they were focused on these questions. Was the Trump campaign involved with the DNC hack? Were they involved with working with with WikiLeaks? Steele alleged both the hack and the distribution occurred with the full knowledge and support of the Trump campaign, Trump himself, and senior members of the campaign. But we know from the Fisa warrant application that the court was aware that Steele hadn't been to Russia. He was using subsources. This is further corroborated by testimony from Glenn Simpson, Fusion GPS. He's the person who hired Christopher Steele to look into this matter. Simpson and Fusion GPS have been hired by the DNC and the Hillary Clinton campaign via law firm Perkins Coie. And so he said that Steele didn't go to Russia himself. He would have used a, quote, network of sources who live in or came from the place that you're interested in, and you would run a network of subsources or subcontractors who travel around and gather information for you. And so he hires these people to travel and talk to people and find out what's going on. These sources, then he hires people, and then they go out and they talk to the people who are cited in the Steele dossier. And this was said to be Russian Kremlin intelligence officials, including, I'm not going to pronounce this correctly, Vyacheslav Shrubnikov and Vladislav Surkov. And these were individuals said to be close to Vladimir Putin. This doesn't mean that Steele actually got into contact with these guys. This is who he's citing as his sources. And so we don't know if they actually established contact or if he was just including them as footnotes to make it seem as if the allegations were more credible than perhaps they actually are. In any event, the fact that Steele utilized subsources is a matter of public record. This is from Vanity Fair in 2017 discussing Christopher Steele. He couldn't travel to Russia. There was no safe way for him to go there. And so he could rely on a network of an army of sources whose loyalty and information he had bought and paid for over the years. And so the vengeful FSB would be watching him closely, but a working relationship with knowledgeable contacts in London and elsewhere in the West, from angry emigres to wheeling and dealing oligarchs always eager to curry favor with a man with ties to Secret Service, to political dissidents with well-honed axes to grind. And perhaps most promising of all, he had access to networks of well-placed Joes, to use jargon of his former profession, he directed from his desk at the London station, assets who had their eyes and ears on the ground in Russia. And so they would have gotten in touch, presumably with Surkov and Shrubnikov, and then this information would have filtered back into the Steele dossier allegations. And I mean, that's how it's, officially put together. But we know now that Steele thought that the information needed to be further corroborated, that this was an ongoing problem with the Steele dossier, and when he was called to testify in a court case, I would say further corroborated and verified. And the question was, were one of the caveats you provided to Mr. Kramer? This is someone he had passed off the dossier to, of the McCain Institute, that it needed to be further corroborated and verified, and he said yes, it would need to be further corroborated and verified, and that's where we are with this. And then also Kramer had said that he explained that what was produced, this was Kramer of the McCain Institute, was that it needed to be corroborated and verified. He himself did not feel that he was in a position to vouch for everything that was produced in this. He felt that based on the sources and based on his own company's track record, he felt at least he had the best sources possible to provide the information. And so but this is not probable cause. If he couldn't vouch for it, then he wasn't an eyewitness to the allegations, and you're not really meeting up with probable cause to get a Fisa warrant. And so that means that in 2018, Justin Amash was correct. You have, without sufficient cause, a Fisa warrant being taken out against Americans based upon subsources, and the court knew that this was not firsthand information, and so that's a huge problem. I think that Justin Amash is he's spearheaded FISA reform in the past, but now he's not concerned about it when it involves President Donald Trump, his political opponent. And James Comey was fired for in a large degree lying to President Trump about the extent of the investigation into him. And that's the president's prerogative. I think you need to have FBI directors who can level with the president. Why wasn't President Trump just simply given a defensive briefing about all this? Why were they carrying on the investigation into the administration? And now that it's over, now that we know, based upon the Mueller report, that there was no coordination or conspiracy by the Trump campaign or Trump or any American with Russia to interfere in the elections, why was firing Comey for carrying on that fraudulent investigation? Why is that grounds for impeachment? It doesn't make sense. We should be firing the people who are engaged in FISA abuse, not promoting them or not giving them pedestals to, take out a sitting elected president and overturn the results of the 2016 election. President Trump had ample reason to know that the investigation into him was fraudulent. The Steele dossier was published in January of 2017 by BuzzFeed, and we knew almost instantaneously that it was fraudulent. Michael Cohen had never been to Prague. He showed his passport to President Trump. This occurred in January 2017. And he says, look, I've never been to Prague, and I couldn't have very well been there meeting with Russian agents to mop up the mess of the supposed conspiracy between Manafort, Page, and Russia on the DNC hack. And so, and I think that's legitimate. I think that was one reason for, and then we knew as early as April of 2017 that the FBI used the dossier in the Trump-Russia investigation to get the Fisa warrants. It's in black and white. This was CNN, and so this was all public information. And we knew, and so if Trump knew, and Trump himself was in a position to know that the allegations into him were false, that he was a Russian agent. He would just know. And so by the time James Comey is fired for lying about the extent of this investigation, it was already in the public domain that the dossier was used for FISA abuse, and that it was fraudulent. And this is where we are right now with this. That James Comey should have been fired. Any Justice Department officials or other agency officials who were involved with using the dossier and pushing this investigation and then trying to cover it up, they should be fired. They should be removed from office. We have to rein in FISA abuse. In 2013, Justin Amash was very much in favor of reining in FISA abuse and the mass surveillance system. But when it was used against President Donald Trump, Justin Amash is nowhere to be found. Back then, he said, when you had the chance to stand up for Americans' privacy, did you? Well, when you had this, Congressman Amash, when you had the chance to stand up for President Trump's right to privacy, and right to not be falsely accused of being a Russian agent and have FISA surveillance and spying on him and his campaign, where were you? Are you going to stand with President Trump now that we know it was all fake, that it was obtained fraudulently and without sufficient cause, and that this was dangerous? And is one of the dangers of the secret foreign intelligence surveillance court, where they use subsources and rumors, supposedly from top spy officials in Moscow, which, by the way, doesn't make much sense. Why were they ratting out Vladimir Putin and the DNC hack to these sources and to steal? But leaving that aside, it could have been an intention to sow chaos as a part of their election interference. And so they were actually not trying to help Trump, as DNI James Clapper said in January 2017. They were actually trying to hurt Trump. Or Steele didn't actually have contacts with Trubnikov and Surkov, and that the network of sources that Glenn Simpson had described, it was not real. It was made up. We didn't have a situation where we could really corroborate the information. And this has been said over and over again. And even Steele himself felt he couldn't vouch for it. It needed to be further corroborated and verified. And so we need to take all this into account when we consider whether or not James Comey should have been fired, for clearly he should have been. And as for Justin Amash, I don't think we should really take his call for impeachment all that seriously. This is not obstruction. The president has the power over the executive branch. The vesting clause of Article 2 gives all of the executive power to the president. And so when officials of the executive branch are abusing their power, violating the civil rights of Carter Page and other people, the Trump campaign, those people need to be removed. There needs to be political oversight by the president of these spying authorities. If they're not going to do it, who else is going to, and the attorney general is going to sign off on these things, then who else is going to oversee it that has a direct line to the American people? Well, right now that's President Trump, and he's doing his job. And we need to make sure this doesn't happen again. President Obama supposedly was out of the loop, supposedly knew nothing about the Fisa warrant, knew nothing about the FBI investigation of President Trump during 2016 before he got elected. So you had the FBI and Justice Department and intelligence agencies spying on President Trump or then candidate Trump and his campaign with the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court using subsources, unverified garbage, and allegations that turned out not to be true once they were put to close scrutiny in the Mueller report. And they just kept going back and renewing it and renewing it and renewing it. In 2017, January 2017, this is the New York Times, FBI agents had tracked down and interviewed some of Steele's sources. And according to Justice Department document, and 3 people familiar with the events who spoke on a condition of anonymity, after questioning him about where he'd gotten his information, they suspected he might have added his own interpretations to reports passed on by his sources. One of the people said, for the FBI, this made it harder to decide what to trust. And as early as January 2017, they had grave misgivings about the reliability of the document and his preoccupation with opponents, or the fact that he was focused on President Trump. He wanted to get President Trump, and so Amash, I don't think he's really calling it straight here. You're either in favor of reining in these spy authorities, especially when they're abused, or you have no credibility on the issue. And I think Justin Amash has destroyed his credibility on this issue. Again, we've been very supportive of his efforts to defund mass surveillance in 2013. We support the USA Rights Act. We still support the USA Rights Act. We need to rein in these authorities so that they're not abused again. But Amash, he says that, and this is, ironically, America's institutions depend on officials to uphold both the rules and spirit of our constitutional system, even when to do so is personally inconvenient or yields a politically unfavorable outcome. Well, we know Amash doesn't like President Trump. And in this case, the Mueller report found that President Trump was innocent of conspiracy with Russia. And so the officials who were carrying on that investigation, well, they should have been fired. And that's not obstruction of justice. That's vindicating the rule of law and making certain that our executive branch is not violating the rights of the American people. And the real danger here is that the foreign intelligence surveillance system is endangering and not only the liberty of the American people, but the peaceful transition of power when the American people elected President Trump. This shouldn't be happening in America, and we need to make sure it never happens again. But we're not going to get there if we're following the lead of Justin Amash. We need to follow the lead of Attorney General William Barr and President Trump in getting to the bottom of this. We need to make sure that unverified allegations are not used in Fisa warrants ever again. And that's the commentary. This is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. And hit that subscribe button. Have a good day.